I think motorcycles are kind of a great way to avoid doing what you know you need to do in your life, or at least it was the case for me. At some point I knew I wanted to go to law school, but I really didn't want to sit down and take the LSAT when I was a senior in college. Instead, I wanted to walk into the local motorcycle dealership and take out a loan with my newfound credit that I didn't know I had. And so with zero money down, I got a KLR 650, which is basically a big dual sport. It's like a dirt bike on steroids. And I spent my senior year riding that around the campus. And the little renegade inside my brain said, go against the grain. Law school was calling, but I wasn't picking up the phone. Instead, I wanted to study journalism and write a column in the newspaper. I wanted to critique society. I didn't really feel like I fit in. And so I leaned into that motorcycle, and when I graduated, I sold it and got myself a faster, sportier, sexier machine, a 1998 Honda VFR 800. We're talking about a motorcycle that, if you know, you know. It was iconic. It had gear-driven cams. It had an 800cc V4 engine with an aftermarket exhaust. It sounded sublime. And it was a sport touring motorcycle, but very little emphasis on the touring and lots of emphasis on the sport part of that. If you twisted the throttle, the engine would rev up and you would become aloft with the front wheel in the air. I would take that motorcycle after graduation and ride it all over Westchester County. I rode it in the opposite direction of the LSAT and law school. I took an easy job in Mamaroneck and I worked there for 2 years, and I just focused on showing up to work, doing the bare minimum, going home, riding the motorcycle, posting about it online. When I was on it, I'd ride it up the Taconic Parkway, Route 218 in Newburgh and near West Point. We're talking some of the best driving roads in the country, looking down over the Hudson River, hundreds of meters below. And then when a Corvette driver wanted to test your mettle, you could have a competition to see who's just more insane. And I did those things because I was 21 years old, and I thought I was invincible. I'd come home at the end of the day on a weekend and never really think to myself how unbelievably lucky I was that I hadn't killed myself or someone else. I rode at the very edge of the limit. But I also thought of myself as a good rider. I grew up riding dirt bikes in my backyard and through the woods with my neighbors. I thought I had enough skill, and then where I lacked skill, I could just beat the odds of a driver not paying attention or running me off the road. But I had so many close calls. Drivers merging onto the highway without looking, deer late at night, and extreme speeds that compound the problem of deer not being able to get out of their own way. Yeah, it was a real gamble. The universe finally did tap me on the shoulder. I had to get new tires and sprockets and a chain. So I was basically getting the motorcycle ready for the next season. It was May, and I was excited to pick it up from the dealership. Anybody who's ever replaced tires on a motorcycle knows, or has at least heard, of a thing called mold release compound. From the factory, new tires have to get popped out of these big molds where they pour the molten rubber in, and they don't just come out unless you use a kind of lubricant, kind of like when you spray oil on a baking pan in order to prevent whatever you're cooking from sticking to that surface. Same with motorcycle tires from the factory. And everybody knows that you're supposed to take it super easy to scrub in those tires. First 50 miles, you're supposed to take it nice and easy, not lean over extreme angles, not ride at the limits of traction. Piece of cake. I picked up the motorcycle from the dealership, and as soon as I made the left turn, merging onto the road, I fell off the bike. The bike went out from under me. It was like it hit black ice. It just lost traction, and I slammed my head on the pavement. Thankfully, I was wearing a helmet. I pulled the bike over to kind of collect myself and take inventory. My beautiful VFR with its Ferrari red fairings, they were maimed. I took inventory of where I was, which was right on the edge of a huge cemetery. At that moment, I realized I had gotten exceedingly lucky, that this was my first accident, that I didn't get run over by a car, I didn't fly off the bike at a highway speed. Instead, I was just embarrassed. The mechanics at the dealership were all standing in the driveway looking at me, and I felt stupid. I took it as a sign that things had finally reached their natural terminus. It was no longer a distraction that I welcomed in my life. I sold the motorcycle, sick to my stomach that I had damaged it, but also ready to move on from this chapter. I figured I had finally won enough to put my cards down and cash out. So I did, and I ended up going to law school. But I like to think back and remember that not everybody gets a little tap on the shoulder from the universe. Sometimes it's just a whisper, it's not a slap across the face. And when you're up at the casino, it's very hard to realize that this is the best you're going to do, and there's nowhere to go from here except down. I feel like that's summing up what I did with my motorcycle. I had won as much as I could. If I had continued to ride another season, I have no doubt it could have ended in tragedy. So if you're using a motorcycle or something else to avoid that thing you know you need to do, and if you're taking risks and you're not listening to that voice in your head that says, how much longer can we get away with this? Listen harder. Take it as a moment to reflect and improve on what you could be doing with the potential that you were given. I love motorcycles. I still have one, but I don't ride it obsessively. And I don't think I'm using it as a distraction to avoid that thing I know I need to do next. Instead, I use it conservatively, and my old mind tells me not to push the limits of traction. And I try to ride within the envelope. But there's a time and place for everything. And as a friend liked to say, everything in moderation, even moderation.